just for Charleston, not just for South Carolina, not just for the United States, for human civilization as we know it, for every generation that follows ours. So for your leadership on this, we cannot be more grateful. Thank you so much. Standing next to him is Representative Marvin Pendarvis. Marvin, thank you for joining us here today. One of the very first to welcome us to South Carolina, this stranger from far west Texas, told me what he was excited about in this state, the challenges that he was working on, how they might apply to challenges that we face as a nation on affordable housing and making sure that everyone is included in the economic success of this country. Though he has not served very long yet, he's already established himself as a leader on these and other issues. Marvin, I want to thank you for being here as well. Thank you. And to President Hsu, to Amanda, to the College of Charleston, to everyone who's taken some time out of their lives to be here tonight, I want to thank you as well. It makes me feel so good to see you and to be with you and to see that University of Texas Longhorns cap right there. Thank you. We're trading caps right now. Thank you all. I just spent the weekend in El Paso with my kids, with my wife Amy, in the city where I was raised, in the city that we are raising them. It was Ulysses, who's in the 7th grade, 12 years old, his first cross-country meet this Saturday morning at 8 a.m. And here we are, 4,000 feet base elevation, up against the Franklin Mountains, which are part of the Rocky Mountain chain in the Mountain West. We're the only city in the Mountain Time Zone in the state of Texas, to give you an idea of how far west we are from you right now. Afterwards, went to his first basketball game, then his second basketball game, then his third basketball game. It was the Ulysses Sports Weekend. The next morning, his little brother Henry, who's 8 years old, had his first basketball game of the season, at least the first one that I've been able to go to. And it was fun to watch it. If you've watched 8-year-olds play basketball, it is cats chasing a ball of yarn across the basketball court. Got to spend some time with our daughter Molly, who is 11 years old and has 9 or 10 pets in the house. Last night we fed the snake, this ball python that she has, these frozen mice that we warm up for her. So more than you wanted to know, but just wanted to tell you where I'm coming from. El Paso, for those of you who have not been there, and I understand we have a member of the Leverton family who's here tonight who understands El Paso's brother Reed is there and is a judge. It is an extraordinarily beautiful community in the Chihuahuan Desert. So not as green as what we have here in Charleston, but beautiful in its own way. On the banks of the Rio Grande River, which connects us, does not separate us from Ciudad Juarez. And that city and El Paso and Las Cruces, New Mexico, this is the point where 3 states, Chihuahua and Texas and New Mexico, all meet. 3 million people from 2 countries, 3 states, forming something far greater and more powerful than the sum of their parts or the number of people involved. You'll never meet a friendlier group of people in the world, even if you do not speak the same language as they do. We have found our common bond. Understand that our differences do not define us, do not disqualify us, do not make us dangerous. We embrace them as foundational to our success, to our strength, and to our security and our safety. El Paso, Texas is one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America. And it is safe not despite, but because it's a city of immigrants, because it's connected, conjoined to Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, the rest of the world. A quarter of those with whom we live, with whom we're raising Ulysses and Molly and Henry, were born in another country. And the way that I look at it, they chose us. They left their family, their hometown, their culture very often, their customs, their country, to start anew as strangers in a strange land. To do better for themselves and for their kids, that's for sure. Just like you're trying to do better for yourself and your kids. But uniquely, they were also called to do better for us. They were inspired by America and the idea of America, and they have wanted to contribute to our success, and by their very presence, they have. That's the story of El Paso. That is, by and large, the story of the United States of America at our best. And tell you all that in large part because I am proud of who we are in El Paso. Because I'm cognizant of the fact that when we fail to tell our own stories, other people will tell them for us. Donald Trump, for example, has called El Paso one of the most dangerous cities in the United States of America. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. It is a basic tool of propaganda, most often seen in fascist dictatorships and authoritarian strongmen-ruled countries, not in this great republic, not in our democracy, not in the United States of America. Repeat that often enough, and though it is a lie, people will begin to believe it, and it will change our behaviors because it has changed our perception, and that's precisely what has happened to us in El Paso, Texas. It did not begin with Donald Trump. For a very long time, this country has projected its paranoia, its anxieties, its hatred, and part of its racism on the community where I live. 85% Mexican American does not look like the majority of this country, doesn't look like the majority of those who are here tonight. And that scares people just on its face, by the faces of those who live in El Paso, Texas. We are somewhat complicit and culpable in not telling our story, sharing that we're one of the safest places in the country, sharing our contributions to the richness of this culture, to deepening the understanding of what it means to be American, what it means to be America. So, this is something that I've always taken pride in, telling our story to others, telling our story to our kids. But something that we learned on August 3rd in El Paso, Texas, is no matter how exceptional you are in this country, no matter how special your community, no matter the distance between you and the other centers of population and power, and we are closer to like 4 or 5 other state capitals than we are to Austin, Texas, our state capital. Faster for me to get to Chihuahua City in Chihuahua, or Santa Fe, New Mexico, or the capitals of Arizona or Colorado before I can get to Austin, Texas. We are an afterthought if we are ever thought of at all by Washington, D.C. And in that distance and isolation and our co-evolution with Ciudad Juarez, something magical was created. And yet, we are still part of this country. And Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us, we are each caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. We're all connected together. You cannot exempt or accept yourself from the rest of us. We are tied in a single garment of destiny. And this is a very violent country. And this is a country where racism and hatred and intolerance and white supremacy are flourishing right now, though they have been part of our fabric, that garment from the very beginning, as we mark 400 years of the slave trade and slavery that began right here in August of 1619, right here in the southeast of the United States of America. And so sooner or later, that will find every single one of us. And though we have on average 18 murders in a year in El Paso, Texas, on one day, August 3rd, we had 22 in under an hour. Someone drove 600 miles from North Texas, a city called Allen, and came to El Paso intent upon killing, as he told the police afterwards, Mexicans. Published a manifesto online before he went out and killed people, and talked about his fear of an invasion, and of being replaced, and of a Hispanic takeover of the state of Texas that would manifest itself in every way, including at the ballot box. I should not have to tell you, I think you know this already, these are some of the same words that the President of the United States is using, repeatedly warning of invasions of Mexican immigrants who he described in his maiden speech for the highest office in the land as rapists and drug dealers and criminals, though they commit crimes at a far lower rate than those born here in the United States. He talked about an infestation, which is how Amy and I might talk about cockroaches in our house, something less than human that you would want to kill or keep out, but not a human being. Not those children that we put in cages after we dehumanize them so you could treat them as something less than human. Not the kids, 7 whose lives we lost in our care and custody. The wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet. One comprised of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees the world over. This is how we treated the most vulnerable, most defenseless among us. This is how we will be judged for as long as it persists. He called them animals, predators, and killers. And he repeated the lie over and over and over again, tens of thousands of times on Facebook, dozens of times on Twitter from his own feed. He talked about it at rallies, and in May of this year, he's in Florida, not too far from where we stand right now. And he's talking about this invasion, and he's talking about these immigrants who are coming to get us, and he says, how do we stop them? And someone in the crowd yells out, shoot them. And everyone else in the crowd roars their assent. And the president smiles and laughs his consent with what has just been said, giving permission for exactly what took place in El Paso on August 3rd. And lest you think this is an isolated strain of his hatred, this is the same man who called Klansmen and neo-Nazis and white supremacists very fine people, days after they were marching in the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia, chanting, Jews, you will not replace us. This is the same man who proposed banning all people of one religion from the shores of this country that is comprised of people from the world over, every walk of life, every tradition of faith. It is hard to find another example outside of the Third Reich of a modern Western democracy proposing that all people are inherently defective or dangerous based on their religion or their ethnicity. That is what our president of the United States of America has said. And on the day after he proposed his Muslim ban, actually signed the executive order attempting to stop Muslim travel to the United States of America, the mosque in Victoria, Texas was burned to the ground. The killer at the mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand used Donald Trump as inspiration for his attacks of terror there, calling African nations shithole countries, saying that he wants more immigrants who look like the people of Sweden and Norway, perhaps the whitest places on planet Earth today. There can be no doubt for any of us about who he is and what he intends and how he is trying to remake this country right now. We have to draw the connections and then draw the conclusion and then stand up and act decisively. If we fail to, in a government of, by, and for the people, it is on every single one of us. We can take no comfort, afford ourselves no superiority by blaming it on one person or his enablers in one party. This is America. It is all of us at this moment. But there's this thing that we struggle with in this country, and I will admit, I have struggled with it as well. It seems that the bigger the lie, the more obscene the injustices, the more bizarre his pattern of behavior, the harder for it is for us to see it clearly, to speak about it honestly, and then to take action decisively. Here's how I propose to change that. Number one, listen to the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, nominated by President Trump himself, who says the majority of domestic terror crimes and investigations that they're pursuing right now are of white supremacists. Let's make that our number one domestic law enforcement priority and stop domestic terrorism led by white supremacists in this country. Two, when the killer in El Paso received his order of the AK-47, a weapon designed for war, to kill people as effectively and as efficiently and as great a number on a battlefield, she called the police in Allen, Texas, and said, what in the hell does my son need with this? I need some help. What do I do? And they said, ma'am, I'm sorry. This is completely legal. No way that we can help you right now. Let's take the following steps. Let's not only ban AK-47s and AR-15s and other weapons of war from being sold in our communities in this country. Let us also, and this is a politically difficult thing to say, let us also buy those AR-15s and AK-47s and weapons of war from the Americans who own them right now. And I understand this is a big step. Not everyone has to clap for this one. But I owe you my candor and my honesty, and I cannot escape the conclusion that with millions of them on the streets, They will still remain tools of terror that frighten our kids as they do mine before the first day of school. Hispanics in El Paso, Texas, maybe right here in Charleston, South Carolina, who now feel like they have a target on their back, and those who pursue them and hunt them in the halls of their high schools, in their seats in an elementary school, through the aisles of a Walmart, are better armed than the police who are sworn to protect and to serve them. If we add to that universal background checks, follow Representative Clyburn's lead on closing the Charleston loophole, then we will make this country safer, and we will no longer functionally accept and be complicit in the deaths of nearly 40,000 of our fellow Americans. No other country like us comes anywhere close to this level of carnage. We do not have to accept it either. And then let's do this. Let's also acknowledge that it's not just the president's rhetoric and the consequences, something that some have referred to as stochastic terror, where a leader puts it out there repeatedly and does not instruct people exactly how to act, but knows full well what the consequences of his words will be. I was in Mississippi last week, and we were there in the communities that had witnessed the largest single state ICE raid in United States history. Nearly 700 of our fellow human beings rounded up while at work, one of the toughest jobs that I can imagine, a chicken processing plant, where some of them have worked for years, in some cases decades, for the crime of trying to provide for themselves, provide for their families, get ahead in this country, contribute to our success and our greatness. 600 agents flown in for the operation, helicopters overhead, one U.S. citizen tased at his workplace, another person punched in the face, folks tied by their wrists, some by their ankles, some their wrists and ankles tied together like you would a hog, and hundreds locked up and detained and taken away from their kids. We met one man who was seeking shelter in a Catholic church with his 4-month-old child. A child who was still breastfeeding, but her mother was now in ICE jail and detained. The child inconsolable, the mother absolutely miserable, depressed beyond words, her breasts swollen and painful because she could no longer feed her child, the most basic human instinct and act that I can think of. And we all, through this president, are doing this to these people right now, and it continues apace, 10 times the increase in ICE raids at workplaces under this administration from the last one. This is a concerted effort to terrorize people in this country. I don't know if you saw this proposal that was floated this last week. President Trump is thinking about setting the cap on the number of refugees that we take into America at 0. How do you explain that one to your kids? Imagine the look on their face when they're reading this in the history book decades down the road. Who were those pendejos of 2019 and 2020 who allowed this to happen? We cannot be that country. So what if we met this challenge, not just defending those undocumented immigrants working the toughest jobs in America right now, sometimes making a minimum wage, sometimes making something far less, their immigration status used as leverage against them, to be able to assault them with impunity in the workplace, to pay them nothing because who are you going to tell and what are they going to do for you, especially in this administration? What if we said not only will we stop those practices, but together, the people of Charleston and El Paso and the rest of the country, we rewrite our country's immigration laws in our own image. Legalize the people who are here, including more than 1 million dreamers, make them U.S. citizens in this, their true country. Never again cage another child, reunite those families that have been separated. Work with the people of Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, reduce violence in their home communities, violence which we are somewhat to blame for, the civil wars that we've been involved in, the drug trade that we facilitated, the war on drugs that has militarized and hollowed out their civic institutions in their home countries, and Guatemala suffering one of the greatest droughts in their recorded history, caused not by God nor by Mother Nature, but by you and me and all of us in our omissions and our excesses, in our inaction, in the face of the facts and the science and the truth. We have the opportunity and really the responsibility to do the right thing, and under our administration, we will be proud of this country again. We will have the president who will heal instead of inflame, who will be confident and courageous about our role in the world, taking the lead on reducing the wildfires in the Amazon instead of turning a blind eye or turning his back. And making sure, I started with this, and I'll begin to close with this. I talked about El Paso's failure to tell our own story, and then having our story told for us, and having our fellow Americans fear us. And I don't blame those who've been told repeatedly by this president and by people in the past that we are a people to be feared. We now just have to give them the alternative. But I was thinking about the history here in South Carolina. When I was on the State House grounds in Columbia not too long ago, I heard that there is a statue commemorating, celebrating, that we look up to, of a guy named Benjamin Tillman. Now, this guy was not only a U.S. Senator for South Carolina, he was a proud member of a white supremacist terrorist organization who proudly shared that he had killed African Americans in this state to try to force the other African Americans who survived that wave of terror to stay in their quote-unquote place. And then when this state, with some of the present company included, tried to erect a statue to Robert Smalls, an African American, a slave who commandeered a Confederate vessel with his family and others, broke through the lines, convinced Abraham Lincoln to allow African Americans into the Union Army, and then was elected to the United States Congress, and I believe distinguished South Carolina by passing legislation that he introduced that created the first compulsory free public education in the United States of America. When that bill was introduced in your state house, it was allowed by the majority, not present company, to languish and to die. So what are we telling the people of this state, the people of this country? Let's recognize the existential threat that Donald Trump poses right now, but let's also understand the current that is flown underneath for people like me, a white guy, or right in your face if you do not look like me, in this country for 400 years, a story that we have never fully told. And so the consequences and the legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and suppression and white supremacist terror continue in this country, manifest in every part of American life. 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America. Health outcomes that are disparate. We have a maternal mortality crisis in America. It is 3 times as deadly for women of color. And at least in Texas, in a kindergarten classroom, where school just started in some school districts last week, 4 or 5 years old, if you're a child of color, you are 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled. The schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline that has produced the largest prison population on the face of the planet, I did not know this until recently, begins not in high school, begins in kindergarten, when that kid does not have a chance against this system. So until we expose this system and tell our full story as a country, tell everyone's story, we are not going to make it better, and we will not make progress on the priorities that we have in our day-to-day lives, those things that contribute to our dignity and our well-being, making sure that healthcare is not a function of fate or luck, but is a universal human right upon which you can depend. It's primary care, it's mental health care, and it's every woman making her own decisions about her own body and having access to the power to make that happen. It's making sure that we follow your lead and free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, embrace renewable wind and solar, and the high-paying, high-skill, high-wage jobs that come with that. And then, following the lead of Robert Smalls, who led on public education in this state and for the country, let's make sure that the teachers of South Carolina and throughout this country are paid a true living wage. potential into our promise, and we will no longer create the fertile ground for demagogues who will exploit our frustration at the dysfunction of our government and our inability to deliver, to direct our anger at immigrants and people who are vulnerable and have no defense against the most powerful. That is our opportunity right now. That is why I'm here to listen to you, and that is why I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States. Thank you all for having us. I appreciate it. I think Allegra is going to facilitate some questions from the audience, or Cynthia's going to. All right, Cynthia's right here. If you can get her attention, she'll bring you a microphone. And we just need to get this second mic turned on. Okay.
Beto, welcome to Charleston, South Carolina.
Thank you for having me.
So, you mentioned solar. That's actually great. That's what I do for a living. I sell solar panels. Sustainable energy is really important, but my question's not about that. I saw in March on Twitter a video, you were at a town hall meeting just like this in Cleveland, and someone asked you specifically about third trimester abortions, and you said that's a decision left up to the mother. So my question is this: I was born September 8th, 1989, and I want to know if you think on September 7th, 1989, my life had no value.
Of course I don't think that, and of course I'm glad that you're here. But you referenced my answer in Ohio, and it remains the same. This is a decision that neither you, nor I, nor the United States government should be making. That's a decision for the woman to make. And I'll tell you the consequence of this attack on women's right to choose. And I listened to you, and I heard your question. I'm answering it. And the attack on Roe versus Wade, which we thought was the settled law of the land. And unless we had any illusion that the achievements that we've made are protected forever, or that progress is inevitable, that has been shattered right now. And I want to tell you some of the consequences of this. In my home state of Texas, thanks to these trap laws that make it harder for providers to offer the full spectrum of reproductive care, more than a quarter of our family planning clinics have closed. And it has made us one of the epicenters of this maternal mortality crisis, because not only can you not get safe legal access to an abortion, you cannot get access to a cervical cancer screening or a family planning provider, or in a state that refused to expand Medicaid, any provider at all. And you're losing the lives of women in our state as a result. I don't question the decisions that a woman makes. I mean, only she knows what she knows. I appreciate the question. Thank you.
Hello, Beto. Thank you for being here. My name is Joseph Willingham. I wish nothing but blessings on you and your family. Thank you. My question is, as president, what would you want to do in your first 100 days in office in order to begin repairing what has been done to our country by the current president?
I'm tempted to ask for 100 days to give you the answer, given what has happened during this administration. We talked about those kids who are kept in cages. Many of you have heard about the Border Patrol station outside of El Paso in Clint, Texas, where the administration inexplicably argued that those kids, again, who just survived a 2,000-mile journey by foot, much of it, some of it atop of a train known as the Beast or La Bestia, the administration argued that they did not deserve a change of clothes. The toddlers should not have diapers. Kids didn't deserve toothbrushes and toothpaste. They were living and sleeping in their own squalor. Not to be too graphic, but for those parents who had a little kid without a diaper, they are shitting on the floor. And that cold concrete floor in their own shit is where they are sleeping. Without their folks, being cared for by other kids who they have never met before. It's really important that we try to envision it, to imagine that level of suffering, so that we are compelled finally to act, and it can help explain how we lost the lives of 7 children in our care to things like the flu. So freeing those kids rejoining them with their families, promising to never criminalize another asylum seeker again, allowing them the dignity to live in a community with family, with our help, with our care, is a great place to start. We mentioned the rise in hatred and intolerance, the fact that it doesn't just offend our sensibilities, but that we've seen a rise in hate crimes 3 of the last 3 years. What about overturning the transgender troop ban so that we recognize the service of every American? Nominating those to the Supreme Court who understand a woman's right to choose, understand that corporations and people understand the full civil rights of every single American, and then being in every single courtroom in this country, wherever that is litigated, and then working with our friends and allies in Congress to back this up legislatively. I think that's an important place for us to work. And then this, I served on the Veterans Affairs Committee for 6 years. Live in a community that has been distinguished by service to country, El Paso, Texas, home to Fort Bliss. I've seen those service members go off to war. I've seen them come back and transition into civilian life, unable to get into the VA. To see a psychologist or a psychiatrist who could save their life from the PTSD that they carry with them. We lose more than 20 veterans a day, every day, by their own hands. So first, let's make sure that we have the resources in the VA to take care of all those who come back from having borne the battle. And then 2, let us end the wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, in Somalia, and bring those service members back home to this country. Sign the Paris Climate Agreement. Take the lead globally on climate change. Make sure that we lead the fight on $15 an hour as a base wage in this country. Elevate unions, make sure that they can represent working Americans, create more apprenticeships to train working Americans. That's just the first 15 minutes of my first day in office. But you get an idea. There's so much, and you said this, there's so much that we have to roll back, but then there's so much that we have to lead on. We have to start right from the beginning. Those are some areas that we could work on. Thank you for asking. Appreciate it. Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good.
First of all, thank you for marching with us during 1199 beach strike.
Absolutely.
The nurses, 50 years ago, which is why I am here standing to ask this question. I'm Millicent Trey Middleton, the CIO coordinator, as well for the Democrats, as well as the vice president for the Women's Democrats. But our main concern is our education. What are you going to do to help with the school to the prison pipeline that has targeted our children from their youthful days to be failures, to be cast out, and to not even have an opportunity at a successful life?
Some have made the case, and you're making it right now, that in some parts of the country, segregation in public education is worse today in 2019 than it was in 1954 on the eve of Brown versus Board of Education. You have an annual funding shortfall for minority majority school districts of $23 billion a year that we are underfunding their education, their teacher pay, their facilities, their services, their technology, and there is a consequence to that. We propose in the first year of our administration a permanent education fund of $500 billion, the proceeds from which are spent to reduce that funding gap. In fact, to level it completely. That begins to address equality, but it does not get at equity. To do that, we propose $500 million a year for world-class teacher academies at historically black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions, creating a teacher pipeline to combat that school-to-prison pipeline, to ensure that that teacher in front of the classroom looks like the students that she's instructing and teaching. Having that connection at a very basic human level is so fundamental to that child's success. And then we will make sure that Betsy DeVos is replaced by a Secretary of Education who has experience in the classroom. That's the way we make this better. Thank you.
for Charleston. We have a problem here in South Carolina when we try to go and organize people. We have where the employer are threatening the employees and also threatening us, the people that is going out to try to talk to them. What would you do for labor union as far as for the employees to stop threatening the employees, because it is their right? If the union is so bad, why are the employees fighting so hard to keep them out? So what are you going to do about that?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your commitment to public service. We know this in the O'Rourke family. You know this because you do it every single day. It's very often the driver of that bus who is the first to see signs of hope or signs of distress or despair in a child. And by getting in touch with the school administrator, the teacher, or the parent, their first line of defense to be there for that child when they need it the most. So I want to thank you for your public service and for making the case for being able to organize. And I think one of the challenges that you and I have, and others who believe in what you're saying, is we've got to speak to those who are not yet members of unions, and maybe even more importantly, to those who do not believe in the power of unions. Maybe don't understand it, maybe take for granted the gains that unions have won. Here's one way that I would start in South Carolina. We now know that 25% of public school educators leave the profession within the first year in the state. Within 5 years, 50% of those that all of us through our tax dollars have paid to train and educate, who through their own sacrifice and the student loans that they still carry on their backs paid to train and educate themselves, are leaving the profession, creating a teacher shortage, an educator shortage, and a support and administrative staff shortage in this state. Now that's not only bad for the public school educator and support staff. It's not only bad for the kids in the classroom, it is bad for the taxpayer, for the economy, for the competitiveness of South Carolina. So let's make joining a union and the right to organize something that is fundamental to the success of everyone in South Carolina, everyone in this country. When we show that the gains are shared across the economy as a whole, union member and non-union member alike, I think we have a better chance of bringing in more support and elevating the place and prominence of unions in South Carolina and in Texas and in the places that you are least likely to find them today. So you have my commitment to do that with the rest of America. Thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it. Thank you.
In the same direction, here we go, over here.
Got you.
There we go. And we have time for 3 more questions.
Hi, Beto. In as specific as possible, how do you plan not only to stabilize, but also to increase the country's financial economy? And in what time frame do you think your plans will actually, you'll be able to start enacting any of that?
Yeah. Thanks for asking the question. Folks, Democrats, Republicans, independents alike, this is the moment where the Democratic Party reclaims the mantle of fiscal responsibility and stewardship in this country. This president, that Republican-controlled Senate, as you probably know, are running deficits now that amount to $1 trillion a year, adding to $22 trillion in debt, following a tax cut of $2 trillion that flows disproportionately to the wealthiest and to corporations at a time of record profit making in those corporations, record income inequality, and record wage stagnation for working Americans. So how do we meet this challenge? One, we rolled back the worst of the Trump tax cuts. So that corporate rate that went from 35% to 21%, the specific you asked for, take it to 28%, which generates hundreds of billions of dollars. Tax capital gains at the same rate that you tax wages and salaries and ordinary income to generate hundreds of billions of dollars. End the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, and Libya, which have added trillions of dollars to the debt. Focus resources on those veterans and former service members who bore the battle, put their life on the line. Make investments in teachers and schools, healthcare, wage growth, and a minimum wage, and you will grow your way out of this deficit spending at the same time that you're cutting costs by rolling back some of the worst of the tax cuts and the military spending. And you begin to get this fiscal house in order. Now, this was a long time coming, starting with the first George W. Bush unpaid for tax cut. It will take us a while to get out of it, but those are some of the preliminary steps that we can take to be on the right path. Thanks for asking the question.
My name is Mayale Hernandez. I am a first-generation high school graduate and a first-generation college student. And it has been said that on your first day of your presidency, you would use executive order to reunite families. And I wanted to ask you, can you be more specific with that?
Absolutely. So, as you probably know, we still have children in our custody, in some cases whose parents have been deported back to their countries of origin. So think of our own moms risking their lives, traveling 2,000 miles to bring us here, and instead of finding shelter or safety or refuge, it is literally your worst nightmare. Your child taken from your breast by force if necessary, which we have done. You were remanded into custody of Department of Justice, then over to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and then sent back to Honduras or Guatemala or El Salvador, very often without being able to track your whereabouts or your ability to track your child's whereabouts. This country should move every mountain, bear any burden to reunite those families. That's the most fundamental responsibility, I think, that we have, and we should be able to pursue it. We should ensure that those families who are detained right now are released and reunited with family members, and then we should end a policy implemented by the Trump administration. They are sharing the fingerprints of these kids who are in Border Patrol custody right now with Immigration Customs Enforcement is sharing the fingerprints of family members who are in the United States, so that if somebody comes forward to claim a child and say, that's my nephew who's in custody right now, they can come to my house and be with me. If they're in the ICE database, they are arrested, detained, and deported. It has such a chilling effect throughout the country, and families are not coming forward. We will roll back that policy, remove that policy, so that we make family reunification paramount and the #1 priority of the short-term of our immigration policy, and then never again break up another family, never again treat them as criminals. I mentioned rewriting our immigration code so that we prioritize not just family reunification, but folks who want to work a job or come to school here, a legal, safe, quick path to do that, so we don't incentivize going around the law right now. So I will make sure that we make it a priority and we put the resources in place to reunite those families. Thanks for asking.
Hi, my name is Taylor, and after my 4 years at the awesome College of Charleston, I'm hoping to go into genocide prevention. As I'm sure you're aware, there is a genocide in Myanmar that has been ongoing for the past 2 years. The Western world has done little to nothing to assist in this genocide or to help the Rohingya victims who are being persecuted. The United States is included in this group of countries who has done little to nothing. As president, what concrete steps would you take to not only help the Rohingya minority in Myanmar, but also to end human rights crises everywhere?
Thank you. What a great question. Grateful for your choice of career. So let's use the full diplomatic force of the United States to protect the Rohingya Muslim minority in Burma/Myanmar, to either relocate there, or if we cannot assure their safety, to find some other suitable place for them to be. But the priority should be returning to their homes, to their communities, to make sure that we do not reward or turn a blind eye to ethnic cleansing in Myanmar or anywhere in this world. And then use meetings like the one that President Trump is at, or was just at, with the G7 in France, to bring the other Western democracies together on issues in Myanmar or Saudi Arabia, which is bombing Yemen into the last century and into the next greatest humanitarian crisis. We've seen 7 million people who are on the brink of starvation or dehydration in one of the most water-scarce countries on the face of the planet. We have similar challenges in other parts of the country, but right now, instead of embracing democracy and standing up for the rights of minorities in these countries, you have a president who's enabling strongmen and dictators and thugs. He literally said he was falling in love with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, embraces Vladimir Putin, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, who's doing this, who killed an American-based journalist with complete impunity. President Trump literally said this, and I mentioned that the more obscene the injustice, the harder it is for us to take in. He said, but they buy a lot of weapons from the United States of America, so we don't have to worry about that right now. What do we stand for anymore? And I love what you stand for, and I want to make sure that we follow that lead and that we take a role nationally to bring the eyes of the world to these challenges, make sure that we stop them, and guarantee the freedom of people all over the world. So thank you for asking. Appreciate it. Grateful.
Beto, we'd just like to thank you so much for coming. We'd be remiss if we didn't get you a t-shirt before you left. So just thank you again very much.
Thank you all very much for having us out. We will see you next time. We're in Charleston. Les hago esto y